Well, I have a couple bedtime thoughts before if you're, what is time is it's close to 2 in the morning here, so in case you're ready to go to sleep like I am, these are a couple bedtime thoughts. Rather interesting. I have a dog that Lucy, she always hangs with me, and of course there's two other dogs as well in the household. And for the most part, all three dogs, including my own dog Lucy, they sleep about probably 18 hours a day. And when you really think about it, I mean, their intelligence level is of a 2-year-old child, pretty much so. Outside of some sensory perceptions like the hearing and the nose is very acute as opposed to humans. And the images derived therefrom. Basically, they're like 2-year-old kids. And as a 2-year-old child, you pretty much sleep the day away. So, and the other thought within a couple of thoughts before bedtime is that as you grow older, like if you're, I'm 56, but I would imagine if I live until I'm about late 70s into the early 80s, or throughout the 80s, or even to into my 90s, which, well, I don't know if I can last that long. Who knows? You never know. But at least into your 70s and early 80s, you wind up sleeping longer. And it's interesting how you begin your life sleeping longer, and then you end your life sleeping longer. I just find that rather interesting. And it mimics a dog's life. And I don't mean to be disparaging about that, but just the idea that a dog or animals, even cats or any kind of animals, for the most part, they sleep most of the time. Most of the day they sleep. And that's because their intelligence level, as well as their functioning level, is of basically, quote unquote, a 2-year-old child, a human child, that is. And so it mimics that kind of brain, I guess you could say brain activity or brain wavelength, so to speak. And but what's really interesting about it is, like I said a moment ago, is in the beginning of our lives as infants into till the time we're about 2 years old, we sleep most of the time. Especially before 1 year old. But even to the point of 2 years old, we sleep most of the day and night away. And then as we get older, into our late 70s, into the 80s and 90s, we tend to also sleep longer. So it's rather interesting to see how in the beginning we sleep longer, and then toward the end of our life we sleep longer as well. And it's somewhat generalized, but still it's pretty relative. And then in between those ages of 2 years old to about your late 70s or so, you tend to only need just about enough sleep in order to, quote unquote, live the waking life. Though unfortunately, I think most of the waking life is asleep, in a sense, you know, through misinformation or through bullshitting yourself or self-denial or not seeing things for what they really are, or could be even depression, psychiatric depression, could be drug addictions, or in other words, all kinds of forms of escape. So in a sense, it's like you're dreaming, not fully awake. And, I don't, when I say fully awake, I mean seeing things for what they are, as they truly are, and not having like a kaleidoscope, so to speak, between reality and your subjectivity, and there's like a screen there, because even though I would say probably about, I hate to say this, but it's probably very true, about 90% of reality is quite subjective. And because of the human brain activity, as well as animal brain activity or whatever, we basically function on the same awareness or consciousness level. I don't know, I'm being a little abstract, but I mean, we all basically have the same consciousness. You understand? I don't know how to explain that. We're all basically aware of our surroundings, and we're all basically aware of who we are or what we are. Unless you're extremely mentally retarded or mentally ill. But for the most part, we pretty much have, it's relative as far as, or the commonality of awareness or self-consciousness, or not so much self-consciousness, but consciousness, being aware of your surroundings. We pretty much are on the quote-unquote same wavelength. We all have that in common. Nevertheless, there are those that are, like I said a moment ago, they're in self-denial, they're doing drugs to escape, they're very depressed, or even suicidal for that matter. They are just, misinformed. They don't see things for what they are. They have agendas or bias. It could be a slew of things. But people will say, well, yeah, well, you tell us how things really are. Well, how are things really are? Well, like I say, it's about 90% subjective. I don't care if you're a wealthy elite, you're a wealthy elite person, or a family structure, or you're rich, or you're poor, or living under a bridge. We're all based about 90% we're subjective. And there are only, for the most part, few people that really see reality for what it is. And so people will say, well, what is reality, man? Well, reality is pretty harsh. I think, the irony of it, I'll tell you. I'll give you a sort of a little, open the window just a little bit for you. I think one of the persons on the earth that is the closest to seeing reality for what it is Woody Allen. I know you're going to say, what the fuck is that? What the fuck are you talking about? But it's true. Woody Allen sees it for what it is. He sees it, order balances out chaos, or else, everything we'd be all dead, and meteorites and comets and planets would be crashing into each other and all this other shit, Be fires everywhere and earthquakes everywhere and volcanoes everywhere. We just would not be. It would just be a complete chaotic experience. There would be no gravity. It would, be just insane, actually. So order does balance out chaos for the most part. And when I say order, I mean in terms of trying to keep things stabilized. Some people will say, yeah, well, that's God. God keeps things stabilized here, right? Well, if you want to call it God, more power to you. But what it really is even though order tends to balance out chaos, what Woody Allen always was trying to get at, actually got at in his movies, though only a few enlightened people probably could really understand where he was coming from. And that is the fact that life is really a crapshoot. And it's a pretty fucked up experience. It really is. It really is a fucked up experience. It's not as perfect, or not as orderly as you think. The randomness is insane. In other words, and no statistical, no social theorist, no psychological socialist, no socialist, but I should say, no sociologist could ever figure out the statistics. No one can. Not even Einstein can figure out those statistics. I think I mentioned that in another video, of how things are so really chaotic around us, and why you're living still and why I'm living still, and why 1 hour ago some other person just died. The chances of that happening is just mind-boggling. In other words, I don't care if you have 27,000 PhDs. I don't care. You could go to Harvard or Yale or Columbia University. You could be part of all the biggest think tanks in the world, and you cannot predict by the second. This person will die at 9:32 a.m. 4 seconds after. It's impossible. It's impossible. You can't do it. You can have a basic idea when a person's going to die. You're going to die within a week. I know it. Oh, probably so. But you can't predict the exact zillionth of a second when a person's going to die. And that's because the chances that are so variable is just incalculable. You can't calculate those numbers. It's impossible. It's impossible to do that. And being as that is the case, who knows when a comet's going to come out of the sky, out of the blue? Who knows when's the next earthquake? Who knows when's the next volcano or the next hurricane? You can predict that, but 1 second. But how do you know that particular house is going to be thrown 7 blocks away in a hurricane? Yes, the hurricane is coming your way, but who really knows that one house here is going to be okay, and this one house over here is not going to be okay? It's going to be shattered to smithereens, but the other house, well, it's still standing. No one can predict that. And that's what Woody Allen was getting at in all of his movies, is that when it happens to you subjectively, like in other words, like let's say a hurricane hits your town, one house remains standing, other houses completely smattered all over the world, so to speak, all over the block. Okay? Who's to predict that? Who is to predict that? No one can predict that. Try to do that 7 times in a row. Predict that. Anyway, who can predict that? And that house that gets smattered to a zillion pieces all over the block is so insane, in a sense, to that person that didn't do anything to have that happen to him or her, but just a hurricane out of the blue, for that to happen with no effort or no moral or legal responsibility. In other words, the owners of that house did not do anything for that to happen. But because of sheer nature or because of sheer odds or whatever have you, that house was just splattered all over the world. Or all over the block or whatever have you. Well, if you take that in more of a generalized sense and think of all the chaos that is around the world, or all the things that happen to people, no matter where you're at on the earth, someone's dying, someone just lost their house to a flood, someone lost their house to an earthquake, to a hurricane, to a lightning bolt, whatever, to a snake bite, to a bee's sting, whatever it may be. And if you take all that as a conglomerate, then you realize, if you take it all as a conglomerate, as a whole, then you realize there's a lot of shit on earth that might not be happening to you individually right now, but some person in India or some person in China or Russia or America or North Pole, some shit's happening in a very negative way that's hurting this person devastatingly, either mentally or emotionally or physically, and yet you and I just go about our business, or right now I'm videotaping. And yet there's some person somewhere around the earth that's their house is on fire and they're losing all their property and all their memories and their photographs and heirlooms and things that they've saved over the years, from handed down from family to family, and maybe they're losing one of their loved ones in the fire. Understand? But it's not happening to you right now, but it's happening to that person right now. So, when you take it as a whole, as a conglomerate, there's a lot of shit that's going on around the world that you and I are amiss to, but really is going on around the world. And that's what Woody Allen was getting to, that even though it appears that order balances out chaos, if you take everything subjectively, individually, of all the things that are going on around the world, there's a lot of shit in life, is basically what he's saying. There's a lot of shit in life, a lot of shit. A lot of shit. And so, when you take all of that, you take all those subjective experiences, and then you put it, like, sort of display it onto like a big, huge screen and see it for what it is, that is reality. That it's not just your subjectivity, but it's all the subjectivities that are going on around the earth. All the experiences that are going on around the earth. And when you put that and compartmentalize that and put that all into perspective, then you see reality for what it is. And as Woody Allen has tried to show in his movies, is that there's a lot of shit in life that actually balances out, that actually not balances it out, but it actually overpowers order. It doesn't appear like that, but it actually chaos actually overpowers order, but in minuscule ways, in certain little specific little areas. And what's happening to someone, let's say I want to pick on the country India, on some person that's in India in some little small village somewhere, in a little house somewhere, in a little apartment or whatever, what's going on with that particular person, and lost a family member or lost whatever, is so excruciating to that person. It's so subjective that you and I, we don't even think about it. We don't even think about that. But there's actually someone actually suffering. Within that suffering, nothing matters but that person, what that person's suffering. So nothing is mattering except for what that person's suffering. Even though you and I are oblivious to it, to what's going on with that one individual in India. But that shit is going on. Just like somewhere in America it's going on. And we all experienced that at one time in our lives, one way or another, you know. And that is even though subjective to that one individual in India, we all basically experience that. And that is your reality. And so reality is really, for the most part, if you take all the subjectivities and all the pains and struggles and agonies and things of that nature that everyone goes through sometime in their lives, on a subjective manner, chaos overpowers order. But if you take it in a much wider sense, excuse me, if you take it in a much wider sense and include everything in the universe, then yes, order balances out chaos. Or some huge comet about 5 times the size of Earth would have smashed into us by now and taken the Earth and splattered it everywhere into all these different rocks and formations all over the goddamn universe, or solar system, I should say. But that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It may happen, may not, but it may happen. And no one, nowhere, no scientist around the world is going to stop it. We're not going to be like, stop that 5 times bigger than Earth comet, or that big rock that's coming our way. Let's stop that. You know, that's all science fiction movies. That's when you have to distinguish between a Hollywood a Hollywood science fiction movie as opposed to real life. But so far, orders pretty much outweighed chaos, or else our Earth would have been just blown to bits by now. Not that it never will happen, probably. Well, not probably, but it may happen in the future. But right now, so far it hasn't. Thank goodness, I guess. Or else you wouldn't be listening to me on this video. So, in other words, after all said and done, you have, when you're a 2-year-old child or younger, or when you're in your late 70s or older, you sleep most of the time away. And those between those ages pretty much live life. 90% of it is subjective. And the other 10% or so, don't hold me to the exact 90%, but for the most part, I should say, for the most part, it's subjective. And then the other part is objective, and that is that that what's going on around you is one thing. It's real. Like if I go like this, that's pretty real, isn't it? I just touched the camera lens. You understand? And if you did that, if you were videotaping and you did this to your camera or your video equipment, you achieve the same thing. You understand? So that's all relative. So there is such a thing as an actual objective reality that's out there. Understand? Of course, without my finger or some kind of having it happen from my body, like I could take my fingers and take a pen and do that. But it has to come from me in order to do that, understand? Of course, something can drop out of the sky and then completely ruin this damn videotaping. But I think we get the point. So there is basically a reality out there. There is an actual relationship between me and this thing here. Nevertheless, still about 90% of it is subjective. I didn't want to get too abstract here because it really was going to be a couple. What I was going to name it? I was going to name it a couple thoughts before bedtime. That's what I'm going to name this. A couple thoughts before bedtime. Of course, it became extremely abstract, and I don't like to speak about this some other time, but I really like to go back. I like to really go to bed so I can go to sleep. But yeah, I mean, life is very random and quite chaotic. It's quite chaotic if you understand that. If you can understand all the subjective experiences that are going on around the world. If you put all that in perspective, you realize life is quite chaotic. Quite chaotic. And Woody Allen is quite correct in his conclusion on life. You know, you should watch. I have every movie Woody Allen that he ever acted, directed, that he ever acted or directed in. Except for 7 movies. No, 7 movies? Yeah, about 7 movies. That's the only ones I don't have of his. But for I have like 95% of his movies I have. And pretty much throughout his movies, all he's talking about is how there is chaos and how there's order. And that it appears that order balances out chaos, which it does in the larger sense. But subjectively, chaos actually outpowers order. And not very many people get the gist of that. Because we're so caught up in our own subjectivities. We're not thinking in terms of all the subjectivities that are going on around the world. And once you understand that, then you realize life is fucked up. Life has a lot of dismal shit to it. And I'm not saying this to get you depressed or melancholy or anything. I just want to put it in perspective and see reality for what it is as you sleep, even more so when you're in your late 70s and onward, or you're 2 years old, which probably a 2-year-old is not watching this video. I hope not, because it's going to be age restricted. But from age 2 and under, and then all of those between those ages, generally speaking, all those people between those ages of late 70s and 2 years old and under, pretty much experience things in life about probably 90% subjectively, and only a few have the withdrawal or the gonads or the intelligence, I should say, to see it for what it is, and that is that subjectively chaos overpowers order, but in the much wider picture of the universe, order balances out chaos. And that's going to blow your mind. This is a very philosophical, abstract video. And so anyway, it was actually just going to be just a couple of thoughts before bedtime, but anyway, I'm going to go to bed, go to sleep, and hopefully you probably didn't get through this video, so therefore you're probably asleep already. Anyway, you guys have a good day. Bye.